Good morning, everyone. We'll now have a brief look at the science behind the FreeStyle Libre system. So, current glucose monitoring offerings do not address key unmet needs. Current methods for generating comprehensive glucose data have significant issues. Traditional blood glucose monitoring, or BGM, is widely available. Pain, hassle and inconvenience of finger sticks limit data points. And overnight data is impractical. Continuous glucose monitoring, or CGM, addresses data density issues. However, globally, less than 4% of the population use this type of monitoring, mainly due to cost and reimbursement issues. Data interpretation is also a challenge. An alternative to blood glucose monitoring and continuous glucose monitoring is needed for a broad population of people with diabetes. And we have this FreeStyle Libre flash glucose monitoring system. And here is the system, which consists of three main components, which is the sensor applicator, the sensor pack, and the sensor. For patients, the FreeStyle sensor is small. It's 35 by 5 millimeters. They can wear it for up to 14 days. It requires no finger prick calibrations. It's water resistant. They can swim, shower and exercise while wearing it. Most agree it is painless to apply and to wear. And it automatically captures, measures and stores glucose readings day and night. The sensor pack and sensor applicator prepare and apply the sensor. So the sensor pack prepares the sensor for use, and it contains the sharp and the sensing tip, which sits in the interstitial fluid. The sensor applicator applies the sensor, and it contains the electrodes and the skin patch. So the sensor assembly and application, the user prepares these prior to application. So they remove the lid from the sensor and the cap from the applicator, line them up and push the two together. They then remove the applicator, press it against their upper arm, and the sensor is applied. When they line up the sensor and the applicator, this unlocks and collapses the sensor pack platform. It unlocks the sensor applicator sheath. It matches the sharp and connects the sensor to the electronics. Once they've applied it, it applies the sensor, adheres the patch, and the sharp retracts back. The FreeStyle Libre has a USB port that they can attach it to a PC or to a Mac and generate the software reports. It's got an onboard test strip port for blood glucose monitoring or ketone strips that are compatible with Precision or FreeStyle Optium test strips. The home button turns the reader on and off and returns it to the home screen when in use. And it's got a backlit colour touch screen. So for patients, this is a liberation from the hassles of glucose monitoring. There's no more routine finger pricks. It's a painless 1-second scan. It's discreet, anytime, anywhere, even through clothing. It's accurate over 14 days. There's no finger prick calibrations required, and it's designed to replace routine blood glucose monitoring and used for day-to-day therapy decisions. There's more information from the 1-second scan than there is with blood glucose monitoring. It shows the current glucose reading, an 8-hour retrospective glucose history, and the trend arrow showing the direction the glucose is heading. The reader reports can easily and quickly provide information such as daily patterns, percentage of time in targets, and the amount of low glucose events. FreeStyle Libre glucose reports show a more complete glycemic picture, and there's a number of reports that can be generated, including this one, the Glucose Pattern Insights report. The sensor tip sits in the interstitial fluid. The interstitial fluid captures the glucose diffusion between capillary and fat and muscle cells. So how long is the lag to interstitial fluid for glucose? And this glucose tracer study looked at that, with the objective of measuring the transport of glucose from the vascular compartment to the ISF. Methodology was IV bolus administration of glucose tracer in 8 healthy fasting subjects with time samples of plasma and ISF. The results were mean time to appearance for glucose tracers of 5.4 and 6.2 minutes. The 95% confidence interval upper limits for the 75th percentile of the time to appearance distributions were 6.5 and 9.8 minutes respectively. And this study concluded that in overnight fasted healthy subjects, the physiologic time lag of glucose transport between vascular and ISF compartments is considerably shorter at 5 to 6 minutes than may have been previously hypothesized. Despite this lag, continuous data provides visibility beyond finger sticks and that of HbA1c. The FreeStyle Libre system has unique technology for sensor durability and consistency. The wired enzyme technology is glucose sensing material prepared by attaching an enzyme and a mediator together and then immobilizing them on the sensor, and this improves the shelf life. The enzyme takes electrons from the glucose and the mediator takes the electrons from the enzyme to the measuring electrode. What is calibration and why it's required? Often the sensitivity of sensors is not known, and it's not known if that sensitivity will be stable during use. A sensor measures an electrical current proportional to the glucose concentration. The calibration factor converts the electrical current into a glucose concentration. The calibration factor is determined by measuring blood glucose and correlating it to the sensor current. For successful factory calibration, there must be minimal between and within subject variability, consistent performance across a sensor lot, minimal in vivo drift, and minimal performance change over its shelf life. So the sensor should be stable with minimal between and within subject variability, and this study looked at just that. There were 28 subjects with either type 1 or type 2 diabetes and 1 subject with total pancreatectomy. The subjects wore 4 concurrent sensors with fingerstick reference. They had in-clinic visits of a minimum of 8 hours to include meal times, and they performed at least 8 fingerstick measurements over a day while at home, and some up to 15 minutes at specific time periods such as meals. And at the end, there was no statistically significant difference between subjects, showing that there is minimal between and within subject variability with multiple sensor wears. Unlike other commercially available sensors, the FreeStyle Libre sensor is factory calibrated and eliminating the need for finger prick calibration. The sensors are manufactured with minimal sensor-to-sensor variation, and this requires a consistent manufacturing process. The sensing chemistry and membrane application processes are critical to this. So the sensor also needs to have a stable response over the 14-day period. And you can see here, on the left-hand side, there were sensitivity calculations before and the sensor was exposed to various glucose concentrations. The sensors were then exposed over 14 days to 17 millimolar of glucose at 33 degrees centigrade. And then after the 14 days, they were then exposed to the same glucose concentrations that they were exposed to before the 14 days. And as you can see, there was no significant difference between the two prior to the 14 days and after, showing the stability of the sensor. Shown here is an example of sensor data with blood glucose reference values and no on-body calibration. The top chart is the full 14 days of wear, shown in hours. The left-hand chart you can see is the first 48 hours or 2 days of sensor wear, and the right-hand side is the end 2 days or 48 hours of sensor wear, showing that sensor stability and sensitivity is maintained throughout the 14 days with no calibration. So we know the sensor is stable, but is it accurate? And this is what the FreeStyle Libre accuracy trial looked at. This will be talked about in more detail. In this trial, there were 75 subjects wearing 2 sensors. It was conducted in multiple clinical centres across America. The primary comparison was to capillary blood glucose reference. The comparison was throughout the 14 days of sensor wear, and there were over 13,000 paired data points. Dr. Bailey's paper was published last year in 2015. And over the 14 days with no finger prick calibration, the MARD was shown as 11.4%. And on the consensus error grid, there were 99.7% of results in Zone A and Zone B, and 86.7% results were in Zone A. The FreeStyle Libre system is clinically proven to be accurate, stable and consistent over 14 days without the need for finger prick calibration. In summary, current methods for generating comprehensive glucose data have significant issues. FreeStyle Libre flash glucose monitoring system is designed as an alternative to routine blood glucose monitoring. The painless 1-second scan of the reader over the sensor collects the glucose data. There's an up to 14-day sensor wear. The sensor is disposable, small, with a low profile. The sensor is factory calibrated with no finger prick calibration required. It has accurate, stable and consistent performance over 14 days with no finger prick calibration and 11.4% MARD. AGP reports can also be generated using the software. Thank you.